Okay, well, good morning, everybody. This is my first webinar, so please bear with me. If you guys have questions, like Vanessa mentioned, you can submit them through chat, but we will wait till the end to answer those because we may answer some of your questions as we go through the webinar. So some of the questions that we're going to cover is a student independent or dependent? Which parents go on the FAFSA? What if a family is having tax issues? How do you determine the household number? What if a student or their parents are immigrants? What if a student's FAFSA gets flagged for verification? So those are just a few of the things that we're going to cover. And if you, like I said, if you have questions, just submit those through chat. And if I don't know the answer, then I can definitely, I will get back to you and look up the specific information. I would rather do that than give you incorrect information. So the first slide, potential situations complicating the FAFSA. And there are several different ones. These are a few that we find are the most common. So students that are not living with parents, they might be living with their aunt or their uncle or someone in their extended family. Parents that have a complicated tax situation. Sometimes you have students who, sorry, I just got distracted. Sometimes you have students with parents that maybe file their taxes incorrectly, and that can cause some issues when they're trying to complete the FAFSA. Students, they might mention a major life change or situation, unemployment, new sibling, living with additional family members, student or their parents are immigrants. So some ways to really deal with this is as you're helping the student fill out this form, just keep in mind that for them it's very intimidating. And you really want to try to ask open-ended questions like, tell me more. And as you go through it, I'm sure you guys have all had those experiences where, students will just give you very short answers. But if you ask them to tell you more, it really gives you some more information so that you can help them get through the application as easily as possible. Also, you want to reassure the student and make sure that they know that they can complete the FAFSA. And the biggest thing is just to help them get through it. Once you submit that information to the school or once you add in the school information or the school code, all of their information will then go to that college or university, and that financial aid office will reach out to the student and help them correct any issues or ask for additional information. So as long as you can help them get through it, that's the most important part. You want to walk through the FAFSA and the guidelines provided with each question. If you need a little extra direction or help, on the right-hand side, each question, there will be a box, and it will give you just general information about how to answer the question. Another thing to keep in mind is as you're working with these students, and you may pick up on some conflicting information. They might say that maybe that mom receives Social Security every month, or there could be some other situation where maybe mom and dad are together, but the student might say they're not married because maybe that's what mom asked them to say. But anytime that there's any type of like conflicting information, you have to let them know. And also the parent that they may be selected for verification. That is typically, it's a completely random process, but the school also has a process where they can select students for verification. And then also you just want to emphasize the importance of following through in a timely manner. If they are selected for verification or extra documentation, typically the standard is 21 days. And so a lot of times if you work with a student and it comes down to their tax information, you want to have them go ahead and use the data retrieval tool, the IRS data retrieval tool, so that they can go ahead and order, mom and dad can go ahead and order their tax transcript. That typically can take about 5 to 7 business days. And that is almost always part of the verification process. So that's one thing that I kind of like to do. If I do have mom and dad there, you can help them log on to the IRS website and go ahead and get that ordered. So the next thing we're going to cover is the student independent or dependent? And the FAFSA, for the most part, lays this out very well. It goes through a series of questions, and based off of whether or not you answer yes or no, it'll place you in an independent or dependent category. So a student is independent if they are 24 years old as of January 1st, if they have a child or other dependent that receives more than half of their financial support from them. Since the age of 13, both parents are deceased, or they were in foster care or a dependent or ward of the court. If they are legally married, if they've served in the armed forces, or they are a veteran, if they have a legal guardian, if they're homeless and unaccompanied youth or at risk of becoming homeless or an unaccompanied youth, if they're an emancipated minor, or they're beginning a master's or doctorate program. Let's see, if they're homeless or unaccompanied, or an emancipated minor, or anything that deals with foster care or being a ward of the court, just know that more than likely that student will be selected for verification, and they will need documentation to back up that claim. And so this is just, this will show you what it actually looks like. These are the questions. So this is what helps determine whether or not they are dependent or independent. If a student is independent, it's very important to have the documentation, especially in specific cases. If a student has a legal guardian, it must be court issued, and the student must possess or obtain official documents. And I see this a lot. So sometimes, a child or a student may live with an aunt or an uncle, but they don't actually have that official documentation. In those cases, you do still need the parental information, even, and I know a lot of times kids will say, well, I don't talk to my mom, or we don't know who my mom is, or their dad, or vice versa. But unfortunately, that's the way, that's just how that goes. Now, if they cannot provide parental information, they can request what's called a professional judgment. And I don't know if you guys can hear that. Those are the pipes in our building. But the students can request a professional judgment, and then the school would require additional documentation. So I'm sorry, that's very loud. Our office is located in an old church building, and whenever they turn the heat on, the pipes bang, and so that's the noise that you're hearing behind me. I do apologize. I don't know if it's an issue, if you guys can actually hear. Okay, sorry about that. I didn't know if you guys would be able to hear it or not. Okay, so if a student is a parent and provides most of the support, the student should prove it through income like WIC or TANF, receipts of child care purchases, child support payments, and daycare vouchers. So this is kind of a sticky situation that we run into sometimes. Sorry, it's so loud. Okay, so if a student does have a child and they live with their mom or dad, and mom and dad provide more than 50% of support for the student and their child, then they are going to be considered a dependent student. And that's, one moment, let's see, that's usually how it's, that's usually how they determine, but they will be selected for verification. And so at that point, they would have to prove receipt of benefits. So loud. So let me go back into full screen. One moment. Okay. So, which parents go on the FAFSA? We do have this little scenario worksheet that kind of makes it easy for the most part, but I know there are a lot of situations that are not so easy to navigate. So the scenario is parents are legally married regardless of opposite or same sex. You want to answer questions about both parents on the FAFSA. Legal parents are not married, but they live together. You answer questions about both. If the parents are divorced or separated and not living together, you answer questions about the parent who the student lived with the most in the past 12 months. Now, if the student lives an equal amount of time with both parents, provide information about the parent who provided the most financial support. Really what I tell the students that I work with who are in this situation, the parent who makes less, for the most part, it's going to be more beneficial to the student if you put their information on the FAFSA. If the parents are never married or widowed, answer questions about the custodial parent only. And then if they're in a situation where step parents are involved, if the legal parent is married to a step parent, they must also answer questions about the step parents. And I come across this a lot. Unfortunately, you do have to add in the step parent's income. Okay, so a legal parent can be biological or adoptive as determined by a state or birth certificate. A FAFSA can be submitted without parental information, but it will be incomplete, and that's not ideal. You definitely don't want that to happen. Students need to follow up with the financial aid office of each college. So, and I mentioned it before, as you go through the FAFSA, you'll add in the school code. And typically the financial aid office will reach out to the student, but you definitely want to have them follow up also. Sometimes you will have students that have special circumstances that can be proved, such as an abusive environment or a restraining order, but again, documentation is important. A lot of times you can get documentation from a school counselor, or if they attend church, sometimes you can even get a statement from a pastor or a preacher. And they can also attempt a dependency override. So if they're in a situation where the student supports themselves, technically they're considered a dependent student, maybe because of age, but maybe they live by themselves and they fully support themselves and they don't have contact with mom or dad or anyone, maybe they're not in legal guardianship. They can do a dependency override, but that will the school will require a significant amount of documentation to back that up. But they can do it. It's just, you need to prepare the student for that. Okay, and so this is just a little infographic that we thought would be helpful. So it's pretty easy to navigate. That kind of will show you how to get through who to list on the FAFSA. And so I'll let you guys take a look at that. And we will send out a copy of the presentation too, so you'll have access to this. Okay, so this is a hot topic. What if a family is having tax issues? And so sometimes an issue may be, the ideal situation is that the family has completed their taxes and you can just go straight through and use the IRS data retrieval tool. That is ideal. But sometimes, and for the most part, that may not be what always happens. So another issue, they may be planning to file, but they haven't yet. So at that point, the student can still complete the FAFSA. You can do like an estimate. And it will ask you, have you filed, have you completed your taxes? And you can say, yes, it is completed, will file, or have not filed. And so you can complete it this way with the estimates. And then once the parent does file, you can go back into the FAFSA and then update it and use the data retrieval tool. Let's see. So the next issue would be if the parents don't plan to file, you can select not going to file. And then you can enter in, now you would need W-2s, or if the parent receives Social Security benefits. More than likely, if you say that they're not going to file, the student will be selected for verification. And at that point, depending on which verification they're selected for, there will be a significant amount of documentation that they will have to provide. Because they're going to want to know how the parent provided for the student. How did you survive through the year? Did you have food stamps? Did you have a Social Security, or did you have income from Social Security, or whatever the situation may be? But there will need to be some type of documentation, and they'll have to list out all of their income and then provide documentation. So the data retrieval tool cannot find the parent. So then that means that you need to, while you're there doing the FAFSA, go ahead and order a tax transcript. Get that in the mail so that they can turn that in. So sometimes there's a situation where students or parents are not eligible for to use the data retrieval tool. If the students or parents who are married and filed as married, filing separately, that's not going to be able to pull their taxes over. If they're married and filed as head of household, you can complete the FAFSA this way, but what's going to happen is it's going to generate conflicting information. And so ultimately what will happen is the school will give the student, or will give the parent, the option, or they'll actually tell them, you need to go back and file correctly. The next would be parents, their marital status is unmarried and both parents living together. They filed a Puerto Rican or foreign tax return. Victims of identity theft. And also, if you've recently filed or haven't filed, you won't be eligible to use the data retrieval tool. It usually takes some time once you actually complete the taxes and it's processed before, honestly, I forget the time frame. I want to say it's 6 to 8 weeks before you can actually access everything through the IRS website. Oh, and the new thing is that amended taxes can now be used with the data retrieval tool. That is great, because that was always a headache before to deal with. So taxes and income changes. Sometimes a prior year tax information does not reflect their current financial situation. And that happens all the time. Some examples could include a job loss, decreased work hours, or divorce or separation. And at that point, the student would need to contact the financial aid office, and they can request to make adjustments for the income to reflect their current situation. This is also, again, this is called the professional judgment. A lot of people don't use this option, but it's definitely something to take into consideration. Again, depending on the school, they'll have to provide, like if maybe mom or dad was injured and they can no longer work, they'll need like a note from the doctor. They'll also need, like if they receive any type of unemployment benefits, they'll need documentation to back that up. So it is a longer process, but it's possible to get through. So definitely don't take that off the table. And so then at that point, the schools will, their information that they request, they will keep that on file. So who gets included in the household number? The number in household. So you would include all children and other people who receive more than 50% support from the parent, and they're expected to receive that through the end of the school year. You would include the student even if they're not currently living in the household. Maybe they do live with the aunt, but if they still receive their support from the parent, then you do include them in the household. If the student or the parent is pregnant and the child will be born within that award year, you also include the unborn child. If there's a child away at college or children in graduate school who receive more than 50% of their support, you also include nuclear family members living elsewhere. So maybe if you have a parent that lives in another country or another city, if they're married, then you can include them. But you don't include foster children. So that's something important to remember. So what if a student or their parents are immigrants? So we're just going to kind of go through as far as who can receive aid. So eligible non-citizens, they actually can receive aid. And then this is a list: U.S. permanent residents who are green card holders, conditional permanent residents, arrival, departure record. So that includes refugees, humanitarian, parole, asylum granted, citizens of Republic of Palau, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and the Federated States of Micronesia. And a lot of times we will refer people to HICA, and we'll get through that in a few more slides. I want to jump ahead of myself. So immigrant students, if they select neither citizen nor eligible non-citizen, or they would select neither citizen or eligible non-citizen if they are in the U.S. and have been granted DACA, F1 or F2 student visas, J1 or J2 exchange visitor visa, a G-series visa, or there are some additional categories listed. And these students are not eligible for federal aid. The FASFA student aid report can help them qualify for state aid though. So just because they can't receive federal aid doesn't mean that they can't receive private scholarships or some aid from state funds and institutional aid. So we still push them to complete the FAFSA because there is money available out there. So if you're in a situation where you have immigrant parents who are immigrants and like a social security number, just report all zeros in the social security number field. And then at the very end, instead of being able to submit the FAFSA electronically, they'll need to print that out and then sign the signature page and actually mail that in. Oops, sorry. Okay, so HICA, they are amazing. So they're the Hispanic Interest Coalition of Alabama. They have so much information and a wealth of knowledge. And so if you do have a very specific or complicated situation, we do always refer people to HICA. They're great. They will be able to answer your questions. And if not, we can all work together to figure out what's going to be the best for the student. So earlier I mentioned I mentioned verification. And so what if a student does get flagged for verification? The student will be notified when they receive the student aid report. Again, the student does need to follow up with each financial aid office at each school they're interested in. The schools all have a similar process, but it's different with each different institution. Excuse me. Sometimes parents and students get overwhelmed because then they have, 4 pages that ask them all of these different questions. And for the most part, they're the same questions that are listed on the FAFSA, depending on the verification. So again, it's just to verify the answers that they have provided, and also gives the school a chance to ask more in-depth questions about their actual specific situation. And a lot of times, we can help the student, but at the same time, the college, they're better equipped to walk the student through this process. I think the best way that we can help is just help them obtain the documentation, or, point them in the right direction on where to find it. But for the most part, I would refer the student back to the financial aid officer because, like I said, they're trained to ask specific questions and to deal with the verification process. So now we get to practice what we've learned. And at this point, let's see, Vanessa, do I need to start sending out?
So you'd go to the polls and go to, I think it would be labeled question 1. So poll 2, question 1.
Okay. And also, do I need to allow panelists? No. Okay. All right. So the first question, let's see, I have a little bit of a lag. Okay, there we go. So the first question is, a student has a baby and lives at home with her parents who provide the majority of support for the baby. Is the student categorized independent or dependent on the FAFSA? And it looks like you guys paid attention. Okay, so it looks like the majority of everyone said dependent, which is correct. The student would be considered dependent. And the reason is because the parents provide the majority of support for the baby. Okay, so now for the next question. A student says she isn't talking to parents right now because they got into a fight and she lives with her aunt, which is common. We hear this all the time. Should the student be categorized as independent or dependent on the FAFSA? Okay. So the correct answer is, the correct answer is dependent. And like I said, the student is still, she still has a custodial parent. She may live with her aunt, but technically her mom is still responsible for her. So the correct answer would be dependent. Okay, so the next question is, a student says that he is 18 years old and independent and believes that he does not need to get his parents' information. Should the student be categorized as dependent or independent? Okay, so the correct answer is dependent. Just because he is 18 years old, that really doesn't have anything to do with it. The FAFSA is very clear as far as the questions when they go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there are 9 questions total. So if he doesn't fall in any of those categories, if he's not 24 years old as of January 1st, if he has a child or other dependents that receive more than half of their support, if he's not legally married or a veteran or has a legal guardian, it's very clear as to what is dependent or independent. Unfortunately, they can't just classify themselves as dependent or independent, which I see a lot. So he would be considered dependent. Okay. The next question. A student's parents are divorced and one parent is remarried. The student receives support from both parents, but spends most of her time at her mom's house with her stepdad. What does that student include on the FAFSA? Okay, so the answer would be her mom and her stepdad. And the reason is because, so the parents are divorced, and one parent is remarried, so we have that information. She does receive support from both of her parents, but she spends the majority of her time at her mom and her stepdad's house, and so that's who you would include on the FAFSA. Okay, the next question is, a student's parents are separated and not living together, but it's not a legal separation. How do you report their marital status on the FAFSA? Okay, so the correct answer would actually be separated. The specific, if you look at the actual question on the FAFSA, it does say, as of today, what is your parents' marital status? So as of that day, if they are separated, then you would list separated. If the student is living with mom, then you, what would happen is you would select on the FAFSA, so you would do separated, but when asked about their taxes, maybe they filed married, and we just actually had this situation the other day. I'm sorry, mom and dad did married filing jointly. You would list that, and what's going to happen is it's going to generate a flag, so conflicting information. The student will be selected for verification. That's most definitely going to happen. But when it comes to the income, you would list just mom's income if that's where the student is staying most of the time. So the correct answer is separated. Number 7, which of the following people cannot be included in on the household number on the FAFSA? Okay, so the correct answer would be foster children. You do not include foster children on the number in household. Okay. Question 7. A student has deferred action for childhood arrivals and their parents do not have papers. The student cannot complete the FAFSA. Is this true or false? Okay, so the correct answer for the deferred action for childhood arrivals is actually false. The student can complete the FAFSA. Um, like I said, if the parents are immigrants and they don't have socials, then you just enter in all zeros. But they can complete the FAFSA even if they're not eligible for if they're eligible for federal aid, they could still be eligible for scholarships or state funding or even institutional funding. Number 9, a student is a U.S. citizen or eligible immigrant, but their parents do not have social security numbers. The student can still file the FAFSA electronically. Is this true or false? Okay, so this was kind of a trick question because at the end it says a student can file the FAFSA electronically. The answer is actually false because at the very end they are not able to submit the FAFSA electronically. They do have to print the signature page and mail them in. So it's kind of a trick question. Okay, so I think that is the end of our questions so far, or our polls. Let's just exit out of there. Full screen. Okay, let me go back. Okay, so this is, I guess we will do our questions and answers now. Vanessa, would you like to take over?
So if you haven't submitted your questions yet, please go ahead and do so. We've had a couple come up. One of them that I think I'll explain, Sara, is about Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, and what that is. And so I used to work at the Hispanic Interest Coalition of Alabama, so I dealt with this a lot. And so briefly to discuss it, this is a special immigration category that provides administrative relief from deportation to young people who are immigrants and who do not have papers, and they arrived in the U.S. before the age of 15. And there's lots of other regulations for them to qualify for this program. But in the state of Alabama, up until the time being, it has enabled them to get driver's licenses and also to enroll in public colleges and universities and actually qualify for in-state tuition. So it's been a huge opportunity for young immigrants in the state of Alabama to pursue higher education. I will note that this program is in limbo right now. The Trump administration has said they would end the program and is pressuring Congress basically to create a permanent pathway to citizenship or legal permanent residency for these young people. And so their status and their lives are very much in limbo, and their access to college. But focusing on what this presentation has been about, as of right now, they can still go ahead and complete the FAFSA and get the financial aid reports that they could use to obtain private scholarships. I'll note that in states like California, they could qualify for state aid, not federal aid. Here in Alabama, they do not qualify for state aid. So they just would help them get private or institutional scholarships. So to go back to some of the other questions, we had a question about documentation and separation, and that there's been the understanding that it needs to be a legal separation, for example, not just a fight that caused a temporary separation. And so, Sarah, could you speak more about that? Because I know, especially with the taxes, and if people filed that they were married, that it would actually trigger verification.
Yes, and so there actually does not have to be a legal separation. And not all states require that. And so it's basically what would happen, and kind of what I mentioned before. The student will be selected for verification, and then the parent will have to write a written. Part of the verification process is, they will have to write a written statement that says, I have been separated since whatever date they were separated, and they have to list their income. But part of that process is that's supposed to be like a true statement, and that's also part of the FAFSA process. So we hope that they're not telling a lie, but at the same time, we really, there's not really much that we can ask for as far as a legal separation is concerned. It's not required, or the documentation is not required. So that's just kind of how it works.
So another question is, if both parents are on disability, what, if any, income does a parent report?
It will. So, and this is also a question as you go through the FASFA. It will ask if the parent does receive any disability, and so you would just check that box. If they filed taxes, you can go ahead and put that information in there. Sometimes people who receive disability don't file taxes. It really just depends on their specific situation. But as you go through the FAFSA, it will ask you if they receive disability. More than likely that will generate a verification. And so, there'll be part of that documentation says, if you receive disability, how much do you receive per month? So, they will have to verify that. But like I said, it is a question on the FAFSA. And you'll go through the verification process. And that's where they really will probably ask an actual amount.
And so similar question we got is, if a single parent is only on welfare, what, if any, income does the parent report?
This is also a question that I ask as you go through the parents' income and assets and financial information. And so if they are on welfare, it's the same process. You would just select that they are. And just kind of move along. Like I said, if they're selected for verification, which they more than likely will be, they'll just have to verify that statement.
So I don't see any other questions that have come in. I see a couple of questions about the resources. I think one of them can't be open because it's triggering the box.com accounts. We'll get that fixed and send it out. Let me see if there's a question over here. What if both parents draw? Okay. That was the same question about disability. So the question is, what if both parents draw only disability and don't file taxes? I'm not sure if you answered that or that was a follow-up question.
You select, so if that is the case, then you select when it asks if they file taxes, you just say not going to file. And then I think the next page, it will ask, if the parent receives, like what benefits they receive, about whether it's like WIC or TANF or whatever. And so you select that. If the parents don't file taxes, they will be selected for verification. They will be asked to provide, if it's a disability, then they may have to provide I don't know if it would be a W-2, but they would ask for specific information regarding the disability. So, and I cannot think of the name of the form right now, but I can get back to you. But if they're selected for verification, like I said, they'll ask that how much does each parent receive each month, and so that would be counted. But like that's in the verification process and not necessarily the FAFSA process.
So I don't think I see any other questions. I'll give a minute. I'm sharing 2 additional resources. One is basically copying and pasting some of the tables that were in today's presentation. So you could just easily print it and have it at your desk, things about taxes and immigration status and things like that. And the other document I just sent is a PDF of the PowerPoint presentation we've been doing. And those don't open in box. It's tricky because I can see them when I open them because I have an account, and sometimes the settings get a little wonky. But we will share these in the weekly email that I send out. So they will be there as well. So I think, Sarah, if you go to the next slide.
So let me go back to.
And so I'd like to thank our national partner, the National College Access Network, that really had a ton of resources that helped us put this presentation and webinar together. So we've shared a number of different handouts that you can use as resources when you're helping students. On our cashforcollegealabama.org website, there's a button you can click for educators, and that has a lot of these resources and many more. And we can also share the questions and answers that we did today. I think what I'll do is I'll update the resource, the general handout from the webinar. I'll stick them in there so you can refer back to those. A reminder that you can call us at Alabama Possible. We're here to be able to provide technical assistance. We don't necessarily have all the answers, but can help research or help direct you to the person who would have them. And lastly, as Sarah has mentioned before too, is that the financial aid offices at the different colleges, like this is really their expertise. They know this process inside and out, and it's part of their role to help students get financial aid if they qualify for it to be able to attend that college or university. So definitely encourage your students to reach out to them. So I think we don't have any other questions. Again, this webinar will be uploaded to our YouTube page. We'll send out the resources. If any other questions come up, specific scenarios you see with students, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And we'll do everything that we can to make sure you get what you need to help your students complete the FAFSA. So if that's it, I hope you all have a great rest of your Thursday, and thank you again for joining us.
Thanks so much.